Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Cold air moved low across the borderlands that night, brushing through creosote and dry grass, and carrying a heaviness that made every sound travel farther. Naya pushed through the brush with uneven steps, her legs burning from hours of running, her breath unsteady as she forced herself not to slow down. Her torn deerskin dress clung to her sides, scratched from branches and dirt, and each movement reminded her how close she had come to being taken. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see her father or the traders he tried to sell her to. Nothing followed her now, yet her mind kept replaying the moment she realized she had no protection left in her own camp. Every step she took was driven by fear and the small spark inside her that refused to accept being handed over like an object. By the time she reached open ground, the muscles in her legs trembled. Her breathing came in short bursts, loud in her ears. The night sky above was clear, the stars sharp, but she didn't look at them. She looked for shelter, for anything that didn't mean exposure. The shape of a barn appeared ahead, a dark outline against the lighter sky. A lantern flickered faintly near the building, and for a moment she considered turning back, unsure if approaching another stranger was a mistake. But her body was done running. Her hands shook. Her throat felt raw from cold air. She moved toward the light because stopping in the open meant collapsing where anyone could find her. She slipped near the fence line when her ankle twisted in a rut, and she fell hard to her knees. She stayed there, pressing her hands into the dirt to keep steady. The barn door creaked open. A tall figure stepped out, holding a lantern by the handle. The warm glow cut across the yard and caught her face. He paused the moment he saw her. No words, just a quick glance that took her measure. Cole Danner didn't startle easily. Years alone had taught him to look first, react second. He lowered the lantern slightly and squinted at her from short distance. She noticed how calm he stood, no sudden movements, no attempt to close the distance too fast. That steadiness eased a small part of her panic, but not enough to trust him outright. "You hurt?" he asked quietly. His voice was low, roughened from disuse, but not unkind. Naya wanted to answer, but her throat tightened. She couldn't form a full sentence. All she managed was a small shake of her head, though her body told a different story. Exhaustion, strain, fear layered under every breath. Cole didn't push her. He took a slow step forward, then stopped again, letting her see he wasn't trying to corner her. He set his coat on the ground a short distance from her and placed a tin cup of water beside it. "It's just water," he said. "You can take if you want. Nobody here's going to force you." His calm tone made her chest tighten with relief she didn't want to show. Her mind raced. Why was he speaking so gently? Why wasn't he asking who she belonged to? Why wasn't he picking her up and dragging her somewhere? Her experiences had taught her to expect the worst. This man didn't match any of those patterns. She reached for the cup with trembling fingers. The first sip felt strange, almost painful because she had been breathing hard for so long. She drank more slowly after that. Cole crouched down, but kept several feet between them. "Stove's lit inside," he said. "Door stays open. You can sit near the fire or stay out here. Your choice." The fact that he kept repeating that she had a choice made her wonder what kind of man he was. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the worn boots, the coat rough from years of work. Nothing suggested carelessness or aggression, only fatigue and the kind of loneliness that didn't threaten her. Her legs couldn't hold her anymore. She nodded once. Cole rose slowly and walked toward the cabin, leaving the door open wide. He didn't look back to see whether she followed. That gesture, giving her space instead of pulling her along, told her more about him than anything he could have said. Naya forced herself up and stepped toward the doorway. The warmth from the stove reached her first, followed by the smell of wood and dust. She settled on the floor near the fire, wrapping the blanket he set out around her shoulders. Cole sat on the threshold just outside, leaning against the frame. He didn't crowd her. He didn't question her. The lantern on the porch flickered, lighting the space between them in uneven waves. Her breathing slowed. Her heart stopped hammering so violently. She allowed her eyes to close for a moment, though every instinct told her not to let her guard down. Inside her mind, fear still ran circles, but fatigue overpowered it. She thought about the decision she had made, running toward the unknown instead of accepting the future her father tried to force on her. The risk terrified her, yet sitting here, wrapped in warmth instead of being dragged away, felt like the first decision she made entirely for herself. Cole shifted slightly, careful not to startle her. "You're safe here tonight," he said. She didn't respond out loud, but her shoulders sank a little. Her body accepted safety before her mind did. Outside, the wind moved across the yard in a steady rhythm. Inside, the fire crackled. Between them, silence held without tension. For the first time in years, Naya felt herself breathe without expecting someone to take that breath away. The first light of day came in pale and thin, sliding across the floorboards and touching the edge of the blanket where Naya slept. Her eyes opened fast, her body tightening before her mind remembered where she was. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the stove. Cole was already outside. She heard the faint sound of hooves shifting in the corral and the slow scrape of a hay fork against the ground. She sat up slowly, scanning the room the way she had done every morning of her life. Doors, windows, corners, checking for danger before letting herself breathe normally. Nothing here felt familiar, but nothing felt threatening either. That alone unsettled her. Safety was not something she was used to waking up to. When she stepped outside, the cold morning air touched her face, and she tightened the blanket around her shoulders. Cole stood near the fence, feeding the horses, moving with steady, practiced motions. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You slept some," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. She nodded once, unsure if he expected more. He didn't. Cole went back to working, lifting another fork of hay, spreading it cleanly along the rail. He didn't talk to fill the silence. That made it easier for her to stay outside instead of hiding back in the cabin. She watched him for a moment, studying the way he worked. No hurry, no wasted steps. He moved like someone used to long days alone. Naya noticed the broom leaning against the wall by the porch. She didn't know why she reached for it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe a way to keep her hands busy, maybe a need to claim some small place where she wouldn't feel useless. She lifted it and began sweeping the yard, her strokes steady and straight, clearing dust and leaves from the packed dirt. Cole saw her out of the corner of his eye, but didn't comment. He kept feeding the horses, tightening a loose strap on the corral gate, and checking each board for weak spots. His quiet acceptance made the work feel less like a duty and more like something normal. After a while, he approached her, wiping dust from his hands. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated. Her stomach twisted with both hunger and uncertainty. Accepting food from a man had become a dangerous thing in her life. Cole seemed to understand the pause, because he stepped away a bit and nodded toward the cabin. "I left bread on the table. Eat if you want. No pressure, no reaching, just space." She set the broom aside and stepped into the cabin. The bread was on a wooden plate, along with a small piece of dried meat. She ate slowly, unsure when she would next feel comfortable doing so. When Cole came in a few minutes later, she stiffened at first, but relaxed when he kept distance between them. He poured himself coffee from a dented tin pot. "You can stay by the fire as long as you need," he said. He spoke without looking directly at her, giving her time to study him without feeling cornered. She watched his hands, rough, scarred, calm. Not the hands of a man who took what wasn't his. After breakfast, Cole put on his hat and walked toward the barn. "Fences need work," he said. "I'll be out there a while." Naya followed him outside, but kept several steps behind. She returned to sweeping, checking the ridge often, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. Her body reacted before she could stop it, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, eyes moving fast. She didn't trust that danger had passed, not after last night. Cole noticed her vigilance while repairing a loose board near the corral. "If anyone comes," he said, "you'll hear me first." She didn't answer, but the words settled in her chest in a way she hadn't expected, like an anchor instead of a threat. Hours passed in a steady rhythm. She swept. He worked. The air warmed, carrying the smell of horses and dust. There was no shouting, no commands, no one pulling her where she didn't want to go. She began to understand something important about this man. He relied on routine to survive. She knew that feeling too well. When midday came, Naya stepped into the cabin and pulled out the small loaf of bread Cole had left earlier. Without thinking too much about it, she tore off a piece and placed it on the table where he usually sat. It was the smallest gesture, but it made her chest tighten with a strange, cautious hope. Cole entered the cabin a moment later, wiping sweat from his brow. He froze for a second when he saw the bread waiting for him. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, but something eased in his expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. She dipped her head once and looked away, but not out of fear, more out of unfamiliarity with kindness being returned. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Cole showed her how to secure the door. He walked slowly through each step, sliding the bar, checking the lock, testing the frame. He guided her through it again, letting her feel each latch and showing where the wood might give if pushed from outside. "It's solid," he said. "You're safe in here at night." Naya nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. Knowing how to secure the cabin gave her more control than she expected. When evening settled in, they ate quietly with a lantern between them. Cole tended the fire. Naya cleaned the table with small, deliberate motions. They didn't speak again, but neither felt the silence was empty. For the first time since she ran, Naya went to sleep without planning how to escape if someone tried to pry the door open. And Cole, sitting by the fading stove light, realized his cabin no longer felt as hollow as it had for years. The next afternoon settled into a warm stillness, the kind that made sound travel farther across open land. Cole had ridden out early with his horse and a short list of supplies tucked into his coat pocket. He expected to be gone until dusk and told Naya only that he would be back before dark. She nodded, but once he disappeared down the road, a tightness returned to her chest. The open yard felt wider without him there, and every sound made her glance toward the ridge. She swept the yard again, not because it needed it, but because the steady movement helped her keep her breathing level. The broom scraped across the dirt in long lines, pushing stray leaves into a pile. The wind was light, carrying dust, but no scent of danger. Still, her eyes drifted off into the horizon. When the two riders appeared, she saw them before she heard them. Two silhouettes on horseback moved slowly along the fence line, too close to be passing travelers. Her heart thudded hard, her grip tightening around the broom handle. She recognized them instantly. The same men who had argued with her father, the ones who had tried to grab her arm before she fled. Their presence here felt unreal at first, like her mind was replaying a memory, but the dust rising behind their horses was real, their voices real, their boots hitting the ground real as they dismounted. One of the men nudged the other with a smug grin. "Well, look who we got here," he said, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Naya stepped back, her body straightening, her stance rigid. She raised the broom defensively, not because it could stop them, but because having something in her hands steadied her nerves. "Your old man still owes us," the taller man said, closing the distance between them in slow, confident steps. "We'll take you now. No fuss." She didn't move, didn't blink. She felt her heart pounding her throat, but she refused to run. Running hadn't saved her last time. She gripped the broom so tightly her knuckles ached. The second man spit into the dirt and circled toward her left side, clearly trying to cut her off from retreat. "Come on," he said with a grin that made her stomach twist. "You know how this goes." Naya shook her head once, sharp, firm. The taller man reached for her wrist. She jerked away and raised the broom, swinging it with all her strength. The bristles hit his shoulder hard enough to make him curse and stumble back. His expression changed then, no longer amused. "You're coming," he growled, lunging again. This time he caught her arm. His grip tightened. She tried to pull away, but his strength outmatched hers, dragging her toward his horse. Her breath came fast and sharp. Fear rushed through her, old and familiar, but something inside her refused to go limp. She planted her feet, twisting away, nails digging into his sleeve. Still, he forced her forward. Then she heard hoofbeats. Fast, heavy, getting closer. The man didn't hear it until the horse burst through the yard entrance with a cloud of dust behind it. Cole's voice didn't break the air. His face didn't show shock. He took in the scene in one sweeping glance. Naya's arm trapped in the man's grip, the other rider closing in, her fear, her fight. Cole didn't shout. He dropped the sack of supplies to the ground and threw himself off the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. His boots hit the dirt in a loud thud, and he crossed the space between them with a speed that snapped the taller man's attention away from Naya. Cole slammed into him with full force. The man hit the ground with a grunt, dust rising around them. Cole pinned him down, his fist striking the man's jaw once, twice, then again, controlled, efficient punches meant to end a threat quickly. The second man lunged forward, but one sharp look from Cole, wild and focused, stopped him cold. He hesitated, then stepped back toward his horse. Naya pressed herself against the porch rail, her breath shaking, her fingers trembling around the broom handle. She didn't look away, didn't blink. Cole's anger wasn't reckless. It was protective, directed at the men, never at her. Cole rose slowly, chest rising and falling with hard breaths. He drew his revolver in one fluid motion and aimed it at the man still on the ground. "You come near this land again," Cole said, each word steady and cold, "and you won't get up next time." The man scrambled away on his elbows, then pushed to his feet and staggered to his horse. The second man followed, neither daring to look back. They mounted fast and rode off, disappearing beyond the ridge. Silence settled again, heavy and immediate. Cole holstered his revolver and turned toward Naya. His expression softened the moment his eyes met hers. "You hurt?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, though her legs trembled. A tight breath escaped her, half relief, half shock. For the first time since arriving here, she felt something new, safety that didn't depend on running. Cole's jaw flexed once. He stepped closer but kept distance, giving her room to breathe. "They won't try that again today," he said. Naya swallowed hard, her hand still gripping the broom. She didn't know how to say what she felt. Admiration, gratitude, a depth of relief so sharp it almost hurt. Her fear wasn't gone, but something inside her shifted. For the first time, she wasn't facing danger alone. The next morning rose slow and pale, the kind of morning where sound carried softly and the cool air held still before warming. Naya stepped onto the porch just as the sun edged over the ridge. She swept the yard again, but today her movements were calmer. She kept glancing toward the barn where Cole worked, not out of fear, but to make sure he was still there. Cole came out carrying a small tin cup of coffee. His boots left a clear trail across the dirt. He paused near her, giving her space. "You rested any?" he asked. Naya nodded. She didn't tell him she had woken twice during the night, startled by memories of yesterday, only to calm when she remembered Cole's voice telling the men to leave. Those moments sat heavy in her mind, but not in a way that frightened her, more in a way that shifted the ground she was used to standing on. Cole didn't push for more. He set the coffee cup on the porch rail and walked toward the barn, the morning light touching the top of his shoulders. She watched him for a moment longer than she meant to. There had been no hesitation in him yesterday, no confusion. He had seen a threat and moved without a second thought, and not because she belonged to him, but because he wasn't the kind of man who let harm walk into his yard unchecked. As she swept, she kept replaying the look on his face when he saw her being pulled toward the horse. It wasn't anger alone. It was something steadier, certainty, responsibility, a promise he didn't have to speak. Cole returned from the barn, carrying a bucket of nails and a hammer. "Roof's loose in a few spots," he said. "Needs fixing before wind picks up." Naya hesitated. Then she set the broom aside and stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. Cole noticed, but didn't comment. He only handed her the smaller hammer from his belt. "You can pass nails up to me," he said. It was a simple request, but to her it meant trust, his trust in her and her trust in him. She followed him to the side of the barn while he positioned the ladder against the wall. He climbed halfway, then turned, giving her another small choice. "You don't have to, but it'll go faster." She nodded, holding the nails in her palm. Her hand didn't shake the way it had before. Cole hammered steadily, each strike clean and controlled. When he reached down, she placed a nail into his fingers. The small contact made her heart tighten, not from fear, but from something new, something warm and startling. She looked away quickly, but a faint heat rose in her cheeks. "Thanks," Cole said, noticing the shift in her breathing, but not pressing it. They worked like that for the rest of the morning. Quiet, side by side, no forced conversation, no commands, just two people finding a rhythm. When they finished, Cole climbed down and carried the tools back to the cabin porch. "You did good," he said. Naya lowered her eyes, but a small spark of pride lit her face. It had been a long time since anyone acknowledged her work. Later, they walked the fence line together. Cole carried his hat low over his brow, scanning the ridge the way he always did. Naya walked a few steps behind it first, then beside him once she felt steady. She watched him move, every step cautious but confident. "You expect them back?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Cole didn't answer right away. He checked a fence post, tightened a rail, then spoke. "Men like that don't let go easy, but they know what's waiting if they come again." His tone held no boasting, no attempt to comfort her with false certainty. He spoke the truth the way he understood it. That did more for her nerves than any promise would have. Naya studied his profile, the lines in his face, the wear in his eyes. This was not a man who went looking for fights. This was a man who had learned the cost of being unprepared, a man who carried his losses like tools on his belt, kept close, used only when needed. When they returned to the cabin, Naya reached the door first and held it open. Cole paused, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you," he said. She looked away again, flustered, but she didn't step back as far as she once did. They ate beside each other rather than across the room. She spoke more today, short words, small observations, but the air between them felt easier. That night, she didn't sleep with her shoes on. She placed them neatly beside the bed, a quiet signal of trust she wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. Cole saw them there when he checked the door before bed. He didn't say anything, but something in him settled. Her fear was lifting, and she was starting to believe she had a place here. Outside, the yard was still. Inside, the cabin held a warmth that hadn't been there in years. The day moved steadily, the kind of day where work filled the hours without either of them needing to speak much. Cole spent most of the afternoon tightening the hinges on the barn door and checking the water trough, while Naya cleaned the cabin shelves and swept the porch twice, more out of habit than necessity. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the road. She tried to reason with herself. Those men had been beaten and warned. There was no reason for them to come back. But her stomach held a quiet tension that wouldn't release. Cole noticed her watching the ridge more than usual. When he walked past her on the porch, he spoke in a calm, level tone that didn't draw attention but offered something steady. "If anything comes this way," he said, "I'll see it before it reaches us." She didn't answer, but the comment eased her shoulders. Not fully, just enough for her breath to deepen. Toward evening, the sky shifted to a dull orange. The wind picked up dust and rolled it low across the ground. Cole stood near the corral, brushing the horse's neck, when he saw Naya step out of the cabin with a bowl of scraps for the chickens. She froze halfway across the yard. Her entire body tensed, eyes locked on a point beyond the fence. Cole straightened instantly, following her gaze. 3 riders moved across the lower field. Slowly, intentionally, their silhouettes grew clearer with each step. One horse limped slightly, confirmation that one of them was the same man he had struck days before. Cole didn't hesitate. "Inside," he said, voice low and firm. Naya didn't question him. She moved quickly toward the cabin, but her eyes stayed fixed on the riders as if leaving them out of sight felt more dangerous than watching them approach. Cole stepped in behind her, closed the door, and slid the heavy bar across. "Stay low," he said. "Keep away from the windows unless I tell you." His tone held no panic, just controlled urgency. She crouched behind the table, her hands shaking despite her efforts to keep calm. Cole grabbed his rifle from the corner and moved to the narrow window beside the stove. The men spread out, not riding straight toward the door, but circling as if testing the yard. One of them shouted something too distant to hear clearly. Naya's heart hammered. Every sound seemed amplified. The muffled hoofbeats, the shift of saddles, the faint crack of dry brush. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to breathe evenly, but her mind raced. If they got inside, if Cole was hurt, if... Cole's voice cut through her thoughts. They're armed. Her breath stalled. She swallowed hard and nodded, even though he wasn't looking at her. The men dismounted. One moved toward the left side of the cabin, another toward the corral, the wounded one staying closer to the entrance, gripping his arm as if it still ached from their last encounter. Cole stepped back from the window and positioned himself behind the wooden water trough outside the door. He cracked the door open just enough to slip out, then shut it behind him before she could react. Naya's chest tightened painfully. The instinct to follow him surged so strong her legs almost moved on their own, but she stopped herself. He told her to stay low. Staying inside meant she wasn't one more thing he had to protect while under fire. Outside, one of the men yelled, "Send her out, and we'll leave you in one piece." Cole didn't answer. She heard his boots shift across the dirt as he found cover. Silence followed for a few seconds, heavy, tense, stretched thin. Then Cole fired a shot. The sound cracked through the yard. Naya flinched but forced herself to remain still. She pressed her palms against the floorboards, grounding herself as adrenaline surged. A man cursed loudly. Dirt sprayed against the cabin wall, one of their bullets hitting low. Cole shifted again, his footsteps precise, quick, controlled. She could picture him moving along the trough, keeping low, choosing every angle with the experience of a man who had survived more than one fight. She crawled to the window and peeked just enough to see. Cole fired another shot, hitting the ground inches from a man's boot. The rider jerked back in shock. "You really want to test me?" Cole called out, his voice steady enough to cut the air. Another gunshot rang out, this one from the intruders. It splintered a fence post. Cole answered with two sharp shots in rapid order. One man screamed and dropped his pistol, clutching his arm. The other two froze, clearly weighing whether this was worth dying for. Cole stepped into view from behind the trough, his rifle raised, his stance unwavering. "Mount up," he said. "Now!" The wounded man scrambled toward his horse first, nearly falling as he pulled himself into the saddle. The other two followed, fear overriding whatever plans they had walked in with. Dust rose behind them as they rode off, disappearing beyond the ridge with no hesitation this time. Silence fell again, heavier than before but safe. Naya pushed the door open and stepped outside slowly. Her legs were unsteady, her breathing fast, but she walked toward Cole anyway. He lowered the rifle when he saw her and exhaled once, long and quiet, letting some of the tension leave his shoulders. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, but emotion caught in her throat. Fear, relief, admiration all tangled together. She stepped closer, not touching him, just standing within arm's reach for the first time. "You drove him off," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I told them not to come back," Cole replied, his expression hardening briefly before softening again when he looked at her. In that moment, with the fading light touching the yard and the dust settling around them, Naya understood something clearly. Cole wasn't just protecting his land. He had chosen to protect her, not out of obligation, not out of ownership, but because he refused to let harm cross his threshold again. And that realization settled deep inside her, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. She wasn't alone anymore. The days after the attack unfolded with a stillness that felt new to both of them. The kind of quiet that didn't mean danger was hiding close. It simply meant the land had settled again. Each morning, the sun rose without interruption, the wind stayed low, and the ridge remained empty. For Naya, the absence of threat felt strange, almost uncertain, as if her body didn't yet know how to live without bracing for something. She stepped outside early, the ground cold under her bare feet, and looked toward the place where the men had last appeared. Nothing moved. No dust. No shadows. She let out a slow breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Cole stood near the barn repairing a halter strap. His sleeves were rolled up, his expression focused. When Naya walked toward him, he glanced up briefly. There was no sign of the tension he had carried 2 days before, just the steady calm she was beginning to recognize as his true nature. "You checking the ridge again?" he asked. She nodded. "They won't be back," he said, not as a guess, but as a fact weighed and measured in his mind. Naya studied him. The firmness in his voice eased something deep inside her. For the first time since escaping her father, she felt her shoulders loosen without fear that softness would cost her something. She moved to the garden patch beside the cabin, kneeling to clear old weeds. Cole watched her for a moment, noticing how her hands trembled less than before. When he returned to his work, Naya felt a quiet warmth settle in her chest. He trusted her enough not to hover or check on her every moment. Later that morning, she found a folded dress on the edge of her bed. Simple cotton, clean, not new but cared for. Cole had set it there without a word. She touched the fabric with cautious fingers. It felt unreal, having something given freely, with no price, no debt, no question. She changed into it slowly, smoothing the sides with both hands. The dress fit a little loose, but it was soft and didn't scratch her skin the way her torn deerskin clothing had. When she stepped outside, Cole was stacking firewood. He turned, took one look at her in the dress, and paused. No staring, no comment, just a faint softening around his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement. "Fits you fine," he said simply, returning to his work. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but didn't look away. "Thank you," she said. They spent the afternoon working side by side. Naya scrubbed the cabin table, washed the tin plates, and swept the porch. Cole repaired the chicken pen and checked the hinges on the cabin windows. Their movements overlapped in small ways, passing tools, stepping aside for each other, sharing brief glances that said more than words. At midday, they ate together, not across the room as before, but at the same table, sitting close enough for their elbows to nearly touch. Naya tore a piece of bread and set it on his plate without thinking. Cole's eyes paused on the gesture. Something quiet passed between them, something that didn't need a name. After lunch, Cole walked the perimeter of the yard, checking for tracks. Naya followed him, not out of fear, but wanted to understand more of how he lived. They attacked because they thought no one would stop them, she said. Cole nodded once. "That's over. You trust that." "I trust what fear does to cowardly men," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, absorbing the certainty in his tone. He didn't bluff. He didn't talk big. Every word he used came weighed with experience and restraint. She felt a deep steadiness settle in her chest, trust, unspoken but real. As evening settled, they shared a quiet supper while the lantern flickered. Cole sat back slightly and watched her sweep the floor with slow, even strokes. She moved with a calm she hadn't shown before. Her eyes didn't scan the windows as often. Her jaw didn't clench each time the wind shifted. "You're different these days," Cole said gently. Naya stopped sweeping. Her fingers tightened around the broom handle as she searched for the right words. "I can breathe here," she finally said. "I haven't had that in a long time." Cole nodded slowly, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his cup. "That's what a home is supposed to be." The word home struck her deeper than she expected. She swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Later, when a moon rose, Cole checked the door one last time before bed. Naya sat on the edge of her cot, watching him. She didn't feel the need to sleep with her shoes on. She didn't even feel the urge to keep a weapon within reach. Her body was finally learning what safety felt like. As Cole dimmed the lantern, their eyes met in the quiet. "You're safe here," he said again, not as a promise, but as a truth he intended to keep. Naya lay down, letting the blanket settle over her. For the first time since arriving, she closed her eyes without expecting danger in the next breath. Outside, the land lay calm. Inside, the cabin felt warm. And for the first time in years, Naya fell asleep with no plan to run. The morning came with a slow warmth, the kind that softened the cold dirt and made the chickens scratch around the yard with more energy than usual. Naya stepped out of the cabin holding a bucket of water for them, her hair loosely tied back, the cotton dress settling around her ankles as she moved. The sun caught her face, and for a moment she let herself feel the quiet that had settled over the homestead these past days. No riders, No voices. No fear pushing at her ribs. Cole was by the corral, tightening the saddle straps on his horse. His movements were calm, practiced, and steady. Naya watched him for several seconds before she realized she was staring. She looked away quickly, but the warmth in her chest didn't fade. He noticed her anyway. "I'll be gone a few hours," he said. "Just the town run. Nails, salt, some grain." His tone held the same ease he used with his horses, quiet and steady, offering reassurance without trying to force it. Naya nodded, but something inside her tightened despite the calm. She didn't like the distance she felt whenever he rode away. It wasn't fear of danger this time. It was something else, something she didn't yet know how to name. She walked closer, stopping just an arm's length away. "Will you come back today?" she asked. Cole pulled the cinch strap and tested it before answering. "Yeah, I'll be back before sunset." She held his eyes longer than usual. There was no doubt in his voice, only certainty. She reached out without thinking and touched the sleeve of his coat. Just her fingertips, light and quick, almost unsure she had the right to do it. Cole's arm stilled, and his eyes softened with something unspoken. Then she pulled her hand back and stepped aside so he could mount up. As he rode down the dirt road, she watched him until he disappeared around the bend. The yard felt larger and emptier without him, but not frightening. Not like before. Still, she found herself stepping onto the porch more often, scanning the faint dust trails on the horizon. To keep her thoughts steady, she turned to the small plot of land she had been tending. The soil was dry, but workable. She crouched and used her hands to break apart the roots, pulling old weeds from the earth. Cole had mentioned planting corn in spring, and the idea of growing something rooted her in a way she hadn't expected. A home had gardens. A home planned for seasons, not escapes. Hours passed in quiet work. When the sun dipped lower, she swept the porch and then checked the pot of stew she had started at midday. She didn't usually cook for anyone. Cooking had always meant serving someone who demanded it. Here, it felt different. She kept the stew warm because she wanted him to return to something waiting for him, and she wanted him to know she cared that he came back. As afternoon turned to evening, she stepped outside again. The air cooled. The faint sound of a horse drifted over the ridge. Her pulse quickened. She moved to the yard just as Cole came into view, riding at an easy pace, dust clinging to his boots. The moment she saw him, something in her chest loosened. She hadn't expected her relief to be so strong. Cole noticed her standing there and slowed his horse even more, almost hesitant as he took in the sight of her waiting for him. "You been outside long?" he asked, sliding off the saddle. "A little," she said, though it had been longer than that. Cole led the horse to the water trough. Naya followed him, not thinking about distance the way she used to. He washed the dust from his hands and glanced toward the cabin. "Stew's warm," she said, her voice quieter, almost shy. He paused, meeting her eyes. "You made it." She nodded. He gave a small, appreciative breath, not quite a smile, but something close. Inside, they sat at the table. The lantern light flickered against the walls. Cole ate slowly, noticing how she watched him, not with fear, but with a careful kind of interest. When he finished, he set the bowl down gently. "You're settling here," he said. Naya lowered her gaze. "I'm trying." "You're doing more than trying." She let those words sink in. She had spent years hearing how little she was worth. Cole's voice, quiet, steady, and honest, felt like something solid she could lean on. After supper, Cole went outside to check the sky before nightfall. When he returned, Naya was standing near the table, hands clasped in front of her, as if gathering the courage to speak. "You cleared a place," she said. "For me. It's your home, too," Cole replied. Her breath caught slightly. She didn't hide it. She stepped closer to him, not to seek protection this time, but because she wanted to stand near him, to show him something she had been carrying quietly. "I could leave," she said softly, "but I don't want to." Cole looked at her with a stillness that felt almost heavy. "You don't have to go anywhere." Her eyes lifted to his. "Then I stay." There was no dramatic moment, no sudden shift, just a calm certainty that settled between them. Cole nodded once, the smallest hint of relief showing in his expression. Outside, the last of the daylight faded. Inside, something unspoken became clear. Naya wasn't just safe here. She was choosing this place, choosing him, without fear guiding her steps. And Cole, standing a hand's breadth away from her, understood that her choice carried more weight than any promise ever could. The days that followed settled into a steady rhythm that neither of them questioned. It wasn't planned, but it formed naturally around the work they shared and the quiet moments that filled the space between chores. Morning light found Naya on the porch sweeping slow, even strokes across the floorboards. Cole stepped out around the same time each day, boots thudding softly against the ground as he crossed toward the corral. They spoke little, yet their silence never felt empty. By the end of the week, Naya found herself moving around the cabin with a familiarity she hadn't expected, folding blankets, tending the stove, straightening tools on the shelf. Not out of obligation, out of belonging. Each small change she made inside the cabin brought a strange warmth to her chest, a sense that she was shaping the place with her own hands. Cole noticed these things quietly. He didn't comment, but his eyes lingered on the tidy stack of firewood she arranged or the way she cleaned the table after supper without being asked. He felt something shift inside him that he hadn't let himself feel in years, something steady and warm, something he didn't fully know how to approach without breaking it by being clumsy or too direct. That afternoon, he sat on the porch repairing a saddle strap. The leather was stiff from age, and a needle tugged through it with a slow pull. The sun was dropping toward the ridge, casting a mild orange glow across the yard. Naya swept the open space near the chicken pen, pausing occasionally to watch him. He sensed her gaze, not in a way that made him uncomfortable, but in a way that made his chest tighten with a quiet, unfamiliar anticipation. When she finally walked toward him, her steps were slow, deliberate. "You worked all day," she said softly. "So did you," Cole replied without looking up from the strap. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the porch, leaving only a small space between them. The air felt thicker, not tense, just full, like both of them were standing at the edge of something they hadn't named yet. "You don't talk much," Naya said. "Does it bother you?" Cole asked. She shook her head. "No, it makes it easier to listen." Cole paused in his stitching and glanced at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was studying the ground, her hands folded in her lap. Her posture wasn't closed off. It was thoughtful, careful. It told him she was choosing each step of this moment, not reacting out of fear. "Naya," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes. He set the saddle strap aside and turned toward her fully. "You want to stay here with me?" The question landed softly but carried weight, real weight, the kind that could change the course of both their lives. He didn't hide from it. He didn't soften it. Cole had learned long ago that if you wanted something honest, you had to ask plainly. Naya felt her heartbeat rise in her throat. She held his gaze for a long moment, reading him carefully. He wasn't asking out of ownership or pressure. He was asking because he wanted her here, wanted her in a way that wasn't possessive but protective, steady, grounded. "I already stay," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "That's not what I mean." His tone was steady, but there was a tremor under it, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "I mean, stay as mine, as my wife, if you want that." The words shook her more than any danger she'd faced. Not from fear. Fear wasn't part of this moment. It was the sudden understanding that she meant something to him beyond shelter and safety. She felt her throat tighten, and for a second, she couldn't speak. Then she nodded once. Slow, deliberate. "I want that." Cole exhaled quietly, the kind of breath a man releases when he's been holding too much inside for too long. He didn't reach for her. He didn't step closer. He just let the truth of her answer settle between them in a way that felt solid and permanent. Naya looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I never had a choice before," she said. "This is the first time I choose something for myself." Cole's jaw tightened with emotion he didn't show on his face. "Then I'm glad you chose here." The porch grew quiet again, but the silence felt different now, warm, anchored, shared. Naya leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder almost brushing his arm. She didn't touch him, but her nearness spoke clearly enough. As the last light of the day slipped behind the ridge, Cole reached for the saddle strap again. His hands were steady, but the corners of his mouth carried a faint, rare hint of something close to a smile. They didn't need more words. The choice had been made. A quiet, honest commitment had settled into place. For the first time, both of them looked toward the future instead of the past, bound not by fear or necessity, but by something steady and chosen. Spring arrived in slow, steady shifts. The mornings warmed. The wind lost its bite. The ridge that once carried the threat of strangers now carried only the sound of distant birds. Cole worked the field with a looseness in his shoulders that Naya had never seen in him before, and she moved through the cabin with the calm certainty of someone who no longer waited for danger to take something from her. Months passed quietly, and their life settled into a rhythm that felt like it had always belonged to them. Naya woke early each morning, her hands resting on her growing belly before she even sat up. She felt the small movements inside, steady, strong, and each time it filled her chest with a warmth she didn't try to hide. The child she carried was a reminder of the life she had chosen, the life Cole had protected without question. This morning, Cole stood near the doorway, watching her with a quiet pride as she moved around the cabin. She swept the floor with the same slow, even motion she used the first day he found her, but everything about her now was different. Her shoulders no longer tensed at every sound. Her eyes no longer scanned the windows. Her breath came steady and calm, not broken by fear. "You shouldn't be doing all the sweeping," Cole said gently. Naya lowered the broom and looked at him with a faint, tired smile. "It helps me, keeps my body moving." Cole stepped into the room, his boots soft on the floorboards. "Still," he said, taking the broom lightly from her hands. "Let me." She let him. It was a small thing, but the kind of small thing that told her more about who he was than any grand gesture ever could. He swept with slow, deliberate strokes as she leaned against the table, one hand resting on her belly. She watched him quietly, taking in the way he had softened over the months, not in strength, but in the way he allowed himself to show care without holding back. Outside, the yard was calm. The chickens pecked at the ground. The horse shifted lazily in the corral. The world felt settled in a way neither of them had experienced in years. Cole set the broom aside and walked over to her, placing his hand gently over hers on her belly. The movement was careful, deliberate, measured the way all his gestures were, but filled with something deeper now, something steady and sure. "Baby strong," Cole murmured. Naya nodded, her voice soft. "I feel that." He brushed his thumb slowly across her knuckles. "You ready for this?" he asked, not out of doubt, but out of respect for her choice. She looked around the cabin, the blankets she folded each morning, the shelf Cole built for her things, the fire that burned warm in the stove, the walls that no longer felt foreign or temporary. Then she looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I'm ready," she said. "This is my home." Cole didn't smile wide. That wasn't who he was. But his eyes softened in a way she understood completely. He leaned his forehead gently to hers, a quiet touch that carried everything he didn't put into words. Outside, the wind moved across the yard, but it carried no tension, only warmth. A life had formed here, not from anything dramatic, not from promises shouted in fear or desperation, but from the steady, everyday act of staying. Cole stepped back and rested his hand on her shoulder. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." Naya nodded, her throat tightening with emotion that was no longer painful, just full. "Together." The word landed softly, deeply. She reached for his hand and held it with her fingers curled around his. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet cabin, letting the warmth of the stove and the weight of their shared future settle into place. There were no threats waiting behind the ridge, no shadows tracking her steps, no doubts left unspoken. This was home. This was peace. This was the ending she chose, and the beginning of everything they would build together. And for the first time in her life, Naya felt certain of tomorrow.